Here's what you get on today's episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business.
It so does. And I also talk to a lot of my podcasters who are starting my thing who may come in not having an interest in having a book. And I'm like, look, you may not like writing, but you know what? You could take your interviews or even your solo shows, have them transcribed. You do enough shows, you have all these transcripts, you hand those over to a ghostwriter who can massage that into your book for you. So you've spoken your book into existence. So it works that way as well.
The adventure of entrepreneurship and building a life and business you love, preferably at the same time, is not for the faint of heart. That's why Heather Pierce Campbell is bringing you a dose of guts, grit, and great business stories that will inspire and motivate you to create what you want in your business and life. Welcome to the Guts, Grit, and Great Business Podcast, where endurance is required. Now here's your host, the legal website warrior, Heather Pierce Campbell.
Alrighty, welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington, serving entrepreneurs around the world. Welcome to another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. I am super excited today to present Michael Neeley, who is a total pro. I have to admit, I'm a little bit nervous, like having Michael Neeley on my podcast. I feel like a baby podcaster. But I love it. And Michael is going to be so much fun. He is like, if you don't know Michael, you are just going to be scrambling to try to get to know him after this episode. Michael, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Heather. I'm excited to be here with you. And come on, I mean, just because I've been at it for a while doesn't make me any different than you. You're a real pro yourself.
Well, thank you. I am super thrilled to have you here. And for folks that don't know Michael, Michael is a former professional actor and medieval knight turned author, speaker, and mentor to visionary solopreneurs. It was actually really fun to get to know more about Michael's background through this process. He is the host of not just one, but 4 popular podcasts, including the critically acclaimed Consciously Speaking, By This, Not That, Something to Whine About, and the PodQuest show. I want to get on Something to Whine About, Michael.
That's a fun one.
Yeah, I'm joking. I just feel like I have a lot to whine about in the midst of COVID as a mom of 2 little people. I'm teasing. We're very grateful we have a good life, but that sounds like a really fun one. Michael is also a member of the Screen Actors Guild and has appeared in feature films with Mel Gibson and Kevin Costner. He's performed off-Broadway with Andre Braugher and Kathleen Chalfant and had recurring roles in several popular soap operas. As the founder of the Authority Academy, Michael now trains and supports heart-centered entrepreneurs in professional speaking, virtual summits, getting published, and designing and hosting their own podcast to massively grow their business and expand their audience. So Michael lives in Santa Cruz, California, and also I learned that he was a professional jouster and has lots of experience training horses and riders and has choreographed fights from time to time. So Michael, I don't know anybody that matches the level of interesting things to talk about in your background, but welcome.
Yeah, it's exciting to be here with you, Heather. And it's funny when you mention that part, like Michael's a former medieval knight. Sometimes I feel like I've been around that long. I feel, when you read all my bio, I'm like, yeah, it took several hundred years for me to get all that stuff together.
Whatever. You definitely don't look it, but you must have really gotten into the role then.
Oh, it was so much fun. It was one of my favorite jobs ever.
That's amazing. How did you get into that?
Well, my degrees are in acting first and foremost. So I wanted to be a professional actor ever since I was in the 4th grade. I got bitten by the acting bug. And right out of college, I was looking for work as an actor. And some friends told me about this restaurant called Medieval Times Dinner and Tournament. And I went down to that place in Buena Park, California, and I kind of hounded them. It took probably 3 trips in before they finally hired me. And I had been on a horse just a couple times in my life, probably, a handful of times before, but they trained me how to ride. They taught me how to sword fight. I already had the background in acting, so that part, the performance piece I could pull off, but I really became a great swordsman and a great horseman doing the show. I mean, we're, literally you're looking at it, we're riding, I'm on horseback probably somewhere between 10 to 20 hours a week, and it really adds up quickly.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I know we were talking for a minute before we hit record, but I've spent some time on horses in my childhood. My dad was a veterinarian. He's a like true blue old Western cowboy. He comes from a long line of cowboys, and actually his grandfather was was one of the original Arizona men, the 26 Arizona Rangers. They had their own television
Wow.
show. Yeah. And so, I'm so impressed with anybody who can do anything on the back of a horse, right? I have
Yeah.
some minimal riding experience, but the idea of roping something, jousting with somebody, like, that's insane. I mean, that seems like it would have taken a lot of training to get to know how to do that.
It really does. And it brings me back to a really funny instance. I remember, on multiple occasions, people would come up to me after the show and congratulate me on a great show and all that. And they would say, how long have you been riding? And I remember when I'd first gone into the show and I would say, oh, I've been riding for 6 months now. And they were like, are you kidding me? I've been riding for 12 years and I'm nowhere near as good as you. And I'm like, well, the difference is you're probably riding, 2 hours a week, maybe for 12 years.
That's right.
I'm riding so much every week. Those 6 months, so much was crammed into it. And so it really does make the difference. When you do something a lot, you start to get good at it pretty quickly.
And I promise I'll switch off the horse riding stuff, but it really is a fun topic. My grandfather, who actually managed John Wayne's ranch for a while in northern Arizona, he was responsible for hiring young cowboys and getting them trained and all of this. And he had hired a cowboy who I'm sure just after the first few days of riding was like massively saddle sore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is so my grandpa convinces this guy to let him put liniment oil on his, and I don't know if you know what liniment oil is.
Uh-huh.
Oh my gosh. It's probably like the equivalent of like icy hot or, you know what I mean? One of those that totally just like sent him literally like head over heels, like as far away as he could get from my grandpa at the time. But I just thought that is a really painful introduction to the cowboy life.
Well, and and the truth of it is, yes. I mean, even now, I haven't ridden in a long time, and anytime I go back, it takes a while to get your seat back and to get over that saddle soreness because it's your body's you're in a different position than you're used to,
and doing that for hours at a time.
Painful.
I mean, that's intense. That's intense. Well,
yes,
man, I've got mad respect for you. So where did that lead? That's so fascinating that you began working for a restaurant and then, it basically launches you in this whole direction in your life. And obviously you'd studied acting, so you were primed for that. But what came next?
Well, I actually continued jousting for 12 years. So for the company, Medieval Times Dinner and Tournament, I very rapidly advanced through, got into the show, became the head knight and show manager. And then I traveled around the country opening up their other castles, actually hiring and training riders for them. And then when I kind of like after 6 years of that, I'm like, okay, I really need to pursue more of my legitimate acting career. And I was living in New York because we had opened a Medieval Times right out there by Giant Stadium. And so I was starting to pursue more stage and television work, as you mentioned in my bio. And then I jousted for another 6 years for the New York Renaissance Fair. Because that was
you just
like
couldn't get away from it.
Well,
yes.
It was a weekend gig and the money was good and I was really good at it. So it made it fun as well. But as I was doing that, I was acting. I was doing more film and television. I got into the Screen Actors Guild. I was bi-coastal for a while there, had apartments in both New York and LA so I could fly back and forth for auditions. And then the most beautiful thing happened to me in 2002. My son was born. And at that point, I was like, gosh, do I keep acting where it's hills and valleys? I mean, you might work and make good money for 1 month and then not work for 3 months. And plus that and the LA smog. At that point, I had given up my New York place and was strictly LA. And I was like, you know what? Let me just shift careers. And so we left Los Angeles, moved up to Santa Cruz. This was in 2004. We finally moved up here. He was 2 years old. And then I floundered for a while, quite honestly. I was chasing the almighty dollar. I worked in the pharmaceutical industry and sales. I worked in advertising sales. And then I got into high-tech startups, even had my own startup company as a CEO. And finally, I started to come to the realization, like, look, this isn't where my passion is. I really need to get back to that. And so I started coaching people which in the realm of mindfulness and conscious awareness and having mindset breakthroughs. And it was at a session with a client where we recorded it. And afterwards he said, dude, that sounds really great. You should start a podcast. And then so a couple weeks later, I launched one. Literally, it was that fast. And then it just took me down this other path. And I'm just so grateful and excited about what I'm doing now. And so that's my journey in a nutshell.
No, that's amazing. Well, I love seeing where people have been, and it totally makes sense. Like knowing you now, like seeing some of these pieces along your journey and like the mindset and the coach. I mean, it's such a great fit. So I'm curious, what year did you start podcasting? Your friend who's like, oh, you should have a podcast, right? Like good friend.
Well, right. And it was just fortunate, the timing of it. And literally, I got to say, Heather, I mean, I feel a little bit stupid by this, but I guess 2014, not that many people knew what one was.
No.
He told me I should start a podcast. And I was like, what's a podcast?
Yeah.
I'd never listened to one in my life. I had no idea how they worked, what they were. And 2 weeks later, I launched, and that was in 2014.
Well, you shouldn't feel bad. I had a friend who you happen to know who told me you should have a podcast, right? And this was a few months ago. And I was like, I should. And I still had no idea. How do you make one? How do you, like, it lived over in the bubble of mystery over here involving like technology and how all the pieces fit together. Like, I had no idea. And it's 2020. So yeah, you don't need to worry about, not being ahead of the curve.
Thank you. I feel much better.
Awesome. So which one did you launch first?
So I launched Consciously Speaking. That was in 2014. And literally even then though, like I said, I launched it within 14 days of finding out what a podcast was.
That's amazing.
And I was just throwing together interviews with other conscious thought leaders, people who were in the space I was in, who were coaches and authors, and even my guiding meditation teacher at the local Insight Santa Cruz. And so it was that type of a show that I was sporadically throwing out episodes. And then, and I don't know if you talk much in your show about downloads or anything, but in the podcasting industry, the median number of downloads is only about 139.
Oh.
And that's literally 50% of the shows get more than that, 50% get less.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know this at the time, but I know this now. And of course that fluctuates, but here I was getting about 50 to 75 downloads an episode. So it wasn't performing very well. And then I released an episode and I got over 500 downloads. And I was taken aback. I'm like, what happened? Whoa, what's going on here? Did I strike a nerve or something? And it made me want to look deeper in podcasting. And so then I signed up for a webinar in podcasting and I learned, oh my God, I'm doing this all wrong. I had no idea that you could make money from podcasting or anything else. So I shut down that show. I got a mentor and I relaunched about a month or two later. And this was now 2015. And I launched it as a 7-day-a-week show. And that's when it really started to take off for me.
Wow. 7 day a week. That's impressive.
It was nuts.
Wow. See, I just gave myself a pat on the back for the last couple of weeks producing 2 shows a week,
awesome.
not just one.
I'm not doing it 7 days a week anymore because I've got 4 podcasts now.
Right.
Yeah, it was crazy at the time, but I learned so much, kind of like the horseback riding thing, because I was doing it so much. I mastered it so deeply pretty quickly.
I love that. Yeah. The challenge of mastery is, it's a worthy challenge. And I agree. Like you sound like a little bit like me, the type of person that just jumps in, but yeah, I love that now you've got 4. One was not enough. Do you have a favorite? Am I allowed to ask that? Do you have a favorite podcast?
Sure. That's like asking which of your children are your favorite.
This is why I said, am I allowed to ask this?
You can ask. I mean, I'll give you the same parent answer. I love them all. I love them all equally. Let's see. Well, each one has their own flavors. It's kind of like, your children have their different personalities. So, Consciously Speaking, I love it for it's my most popular show with over 2 million downloads. Definitely the one that gets the most attention and attraction.
That's amazing.
My PodQuest show is the most fun because as a podcaster, I get to talk about that world of podcasting, which is really cool.
Yes.
Something to whine about. And by the way,
that one must be on the rise.
Oh,
I'm assuming that one's on the rise.
Well, and what makes it cool is it's wine, W-I-N-E. And so it's the play on words because we drink wine, but we also whine about stuff, but we also just have, it's just a total fun show. It's just a romp and no particular schedule. And then the other one, Buy This, Not That, is really something that I built for my clients as well, because they're always asking me, which technology should I use for this, like a mailing platform or which webinar platform or any of those things. And so I've been putting together episodes about all of the variety of platforms you can use, plus training programs.
Yeah.
And that, and it just kind of answers questions for me. I can direct people to the podcast. So all of them are really cool and fun.
Yeah. Well, in such a wide array, that does sound really, really fun. So talk to me a little bit about your own podcasting journey, right? So you said early on you learned like, oh, I'm doing this all wrong. What, for folks like me that are a few months in or new to the podcasting world, what are some of the big pitfalls that you see people making?
Well, I think one of them is that when someone starts a show, they kind of go into it a little bit blindly, which of course I did, and I think most of us do unless you get a mentor. Yeah. But the going in blindly part is they don't know how to monetize it. Like I know, and I didn't even know you could make money going into it, which is also, I think, can be harmful for some people, because if you don't ultimately start to monetize your show in some way, it can start to be a drain. Yeah. Because it's work. I mean, you got to put in the time, and there is a cost to it, even though it's minimal. But over time, if you're not seeing any return on that, it could be challenging. Yeah. And so when I first launched, again, I mean, there was no rhyme or reason to my release schedule. It would be sometimes 7 days between episodes, sometimes 10. I might release it on a Tuesday one week, Thursday on the next week. There was, none of the things that pleased the audience. Because quite honestly, I wasn't even thinking of an audience. I was just thinking, I'm just going to put this stuff out there. And so those were some of the rookie mistakes I think that people make is like, going into it without a business plan. Like, what do you want to do with it? And it's not that I'm knocking hobbyists, because quite honestly, when I started, I was just going to be kind of a hobby. But if you really want to have a long running, successful podcast, I think you need to go at it with a plan.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, most things go better with a plan.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah, I'm
going to build this house with no blueprint.
Totally. Just winging it. I'm just going to wing it. Yeah, exactly. So you have created something called the Authority Academy. Talk to us a little bit about what you are doing, obviously outside of the podcasting, but very much related to that with your current clients and what you do in the marketplace.
Yeah, I love that question. Thanks for asking that, Heather, because there is kind of a natural progression between what we do as a business and as you're building authority. And one of the things that naturally, looking back on it, it was kind of natural. And so now it's what I teach, but I stumbled on it quite honestly at the time. But from my podcast, I started the podcast, and then it felt so natural to flow into doing what's called a virtual summit. And because really, quite honestly, all a virtual summit is a series of recorded interviews batched and sold or marketed differently. And so different than a podcast. And so literally it was so easy for me to next do a summit. And then from the summit, I started getting invited to speak on other people's stages, to speak at their summits, to do all of the speaking gigs. And so that's another natural segue, is to open up your speaking realm, getting booked on stages. And then quite honestly, the final piece of it was, in this, I got to backtrack a little bit. I was approached, I had a book concept and was working on writing a book, and I was approached by New Harbinger Publishers, and they sent me an acquisitions questionnaire. And I got all excited. I'm like, oh, cool. Someone's going to pick up my book. And I'm reading out all this questionnaire and filling out the answers. And I get to this section that says, how big is your mailing list? How many Facebook fans do you have? How many Twitter followers do you have? And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh, wait a minute. They want me to sell the book. And that was an eye opener for me. I'm like, I need a platform. I need to have an audience. And so that was the final piece of the Authority Academy, what I call the 4 pillars of authority. The fourth one is publishing, and that you can get your book published, but don't do it until these other pieces are in place, until you've built an audience. And part of what I teach in the academy is how to use those 4 elements, podcasting, virtual summits, speaking from stage, and getting published, and interweave them in a way that makes them exponentially more powerful. Now I have a year-long training program where students come to me and we get all of those things knocked out in a super powerful way.
Well, I love that. And it seems, you look at those areas that you teach on, and they are all so interconnected and based around the same set of skills.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so obvious that people who are in that space should be doing all of them. But a lot of people don't. They get stuck, and I'm sure this is your mindset experience comes out in working with your clients around showing up in new ways, right? And like embracing all of these platforms as a way to grow not only your brand, but your influence, like really do work in the world that you care about. What are the ways that people keep themselves stuck?
Well, one is, and it relates to just what you're talking about there, is that many people will have one or two of those items, but not all of them are how to interweave them. And it's true. People will go, hey, nope, I'm going to focus on being an author. Great, I got a book. Well, that is a great tool. There's nothing wrong with that. However, it's like all of these are tools, but if you put all those tools together, now instead of individual parts, you've got a machine, and that machine can catapult you, or if you consider that machine like a vehicle, it can get you where you want to go faster. And it's part of why I even looked backwards at what I had done, because people were asking me, they're like, Michael, you just started your podcast like a year ago and you've already got this many downloads. You're already speaking on these stages. They're like, how did you do it so fast?
Yeah.
And that's when I had to look back and go, oh, this is how. It was just such a natural, easy progression. But I found like there's the magic sauce in that. And as an example, I just pull this one as a quick one for people who may go, well, I want to do my book first. Well, here's the thing. If someone reads your book, they finish it, they put it back on the shelf, or they put it in the recycling, or they donate it, or they pass it on, your relationship is over. But let's say you've got a podcast like you do now, Heather, as well. So if you decided to write a book, at the end of a chapter, you could say, for a deeper discussion into this topic, tune into episode 37 of my podcast, where we do an even deeper dive with a special guest expert. And then elsewhere in the book, you could put things like, I do an annual virtual summit that, will be available, and go to my website and sign up to be on my list. Or elsewhere, you put resources. So the book should interweave people back into the other pieces that you do, so that it keeps that relationship going, and it makes it so much more powerful.
Well, it's such a valuable point. And I've also crossed paths with people who are like, oh, I have a book. But I'm like, okay, so are you coaching? Are you speaking? Like, what else is, and they're like, well, no, I've got a website and the book. And it's like, the book was not going to sell itself.
Right.
Oh, and this idea of relationship building, and, the point should not be lost on anybody who listens to this, the importance of, especially with modern day publishing, the fact that most publishers do expect you to show up with a list, to show up with a way of disseminating it yourself, or at least helping in that regard. And if you have that kind of a following, you're way more likely to get a book deal.
Absolutely.
Like, I worked with a guy a couple years ago, and we've worked together for many years, but we put $2.8 million of advance fee publishing agreements in place for him. And it is because he has a cult following around the world. He's he's in a really unique niche. He's a fascinating person, but he came with the strength of his own brand and his own following, and ways to, get a ton of books sold, like before it was even written.
So important. Yeah.
So important.
Yeah. Can I share just a quick little joke here that I learned about that same time, which is just stuck with me? And that's, these two authors are sitting there chatting with each other, and one's a Pulitzer Prize winning author and the other is a best-selling author, and they're chatting, and the Pulitzer Prize winning author is like, I just don't get it. Like, I am so much a better writer than you. My books, I've won the Pulitzer Prize. I'm a great writer, yet you're making 10 times more money than me. And I just don't get it. And he says, well, that's why they call it a best-selling author and not a best writing author. And it's very true. It's how much you sell, not even so much on the quality of the writing always. And now, of course, you want to be a good writer too. But the thing is, if you come in with a platform, with a list, and you know how to move the volume, you're going to be much more appealing to a bigger publisher.
Oh, that's right. Well, and it's, it's the phrase that I also heard at one of the early things I went to on the journey of building my second business, right? Because I've practiced law for 18 years now, but about 5-6 years ago is when I launched the legal website Warrior. And it was on the path of learning how to build that business, which lives exclusively in the online space. That, somebody from stage had asked like a whole audience of people, what business are you in? Right. And of course, people are shouting out like all kinds of crazy answers. And they're like, no, wrong. You are in the marketing and sales business, right? That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. If you cannot sell, yes. So it's so important. Well, and the topic, I love the way that you bridge the gap between these areas. Cause I think you're right that people really can think of them as quite different, like hosting an online summit. But when you look at what it actually is, a series of interviews, you're probably already doing this on your pod. You know what I mean? I think it makes it feel much more tangible and reachable for folks.
It so does. And I also talk to a lot of my podcasters who are starting my thing who may come in not having an interest in having a book. You may not like writing, but you know what? You could take your interviews or even your solo shows, have them transcribed. You do enough shows, you have all these transcripts, you hand those over to a ghostwriter who can massage that into your book for you. So you've spoken your book into existence. So it works that way as well.
I'm so glad you said that because so last night, I'll just tell you, I have been known to burn the midnight oil around here, especially in COVID. And last night was one of those nights where I literally was up until like probably 12:30 because I was getting the summaries and the titles of my next podcast episodes ready for my VA who had to do some things with them this morning. But I was speed listening to like 4 or 5 interviews that I had done in a row, right, to kind of recapture some of the stuff. And I joked, like I got done, my husband had to listen to me like off in the corner, and I didn't have my headphones in. So I was kind of forcing him to listen to it also. But I was like, man, I love my podcast, right? But I just really love the guests that I've had and some of the conversations that we had. And it dawned on me exactly what you just said. Like I should hand over the transcripts. Like I should just download transcripts of all of these things and hand it over because I could put together a guts, grit, and great business, like little mini Bible or mini book. Yeah. So I'm so excited that you said that because I literally had not thought of it until last night.
Yeah, well, and if you look at stuff like Tim Ferriss's, I haven't read his Tools of Titans, but I think that book is based on all interviews and stuff that he's done with people, figuring out what are the tools that these greats are using. And so there's so many things that are done nowadays, which the author is simply the curator of great information, but you're bringing it all together for the reader or the listener in the case of a podcast, and there's value in that. And so heck yeah.
Yes. No. Well, you go to think about even in the bigger marketplace, like you look at New York Times bestselling authors, I picked up Kamala Harris's book, right? And part of me, and, I hope I'm not wrong when I say this, but, when somebody gets appointed to be the vice presidential candidate or whatever, like she didn't write her own book in 2 months. You know what I mean?
Mm-mm.
I don't think so. That's my guess is that there is a ghostwriter behind so many of those books where something happens and like literally within a couple months, there's a book, right? And we have to remember that like we don't have to do it all in the traditional way that we often think it's done. I mean, we have such an advantage these days with technology and transcription services and all the ways that we can streamline this stuff. So share with us a couple of, if you don't mind, if you're able to, a couple of your client journeys, like where you've witnessed them go from before working with you and even understanding what an authority platform is, right? To the end of the line or farther along and how their businesses and lives have changed.
Yeah. Well, what I love about this, and it's very different with all of my clients. And one of the things that I was worried when I first started offering the academy is the fact that to get all 4 of those things done in 1 year is a big task. So many of my clients stick around with me for more than 1 year because they're like, it was just too fast to try to do all that in 1 year, which is great. That's fine. But the thing is with many that come in and they get involved first, I always teach everybody, let's get the podcast going first. It's the lowest level of entry. It's so easy to do and it will continue to grow in the background while we work on the other stuff. Well, many of those people who start with me, they're like, I'm not that interested in podcasting initially. And now most of them have 2 shows because it's kind of like, you start to go, well, I got this other idea too, because it just breeds this creativity.
Doesn't really fit here. That's right.
Yeah. And so many of them have their second show now. And then some of them who are doing, I had one that I just supported in she chose to call it was a virtual summit, but she chose to call it a symposium. And I'm all for making up your own different titles for it to give it a new feel. And she had 16,000 people opt in to participate in this symposium, which is phenomenal. Yes. And so there's the success going on in that realm. And then I've got people who are at different levels of working on the books right now, but I've even had my clients come in with an existing book. And especially for those authors who are tuning in who know about print on demand, even if your book's already out there, see about making some edits. If you've got a podcast now, go back, make some changes, insert little podcast references wherever you can to start to drive traffic to your show. So I've got some clients that are working on that right now. And pretty much across the board, everybody has been excited about what it's doing for their business. I've had some who come in and they make money from their podcast literally within the first month. One of my clients had $10,000 in sales in the first 30 days of launching her podcast. So that was always exciting. And it really is across the board. I don't know that there is any one person who's really, quite honestly, I've had the Academy now for 3 years. And I'm just trying to think if anybody's done all 4 parts so far.
Yeah. Well, it is a journey. It is. It's a lot. And I think that, I like the kind of sequential progression. Again, I think it feels much more doable for people. Like, okay, you learn this, you get this handled, you move on. And it's kind of the nature of things. And like for me, I joke, I've been telling people like my experience of COVID, whether it's trying to clean the kitchen or like I was going to say clean the house. And it's like, no, even trying to clean one room in the house. It's a little bit like dipping my toe in the water 1,000 times a day, but never really getting to go for a swim, right? That's how like kind of divided and frenetic COVID has been a little bit, trying to do anything with 2 small children at home. But I was like, but I launched a podcast, right? I've got like 50 something episodes done, recorded, lined up, ready to go. And yet it is still only one small piece of the puzzle, right? That's the one thing I've done well and consistently during COVID. And so, yes, the speaking is so critical for people that have a message to share. And luckily we're in a day and time when it's easy to do that online. You are getting connected and doing the right kind of networking, and you have a coach like Michael who can help you do it the right way, right? And but I think it does take kind of moving sequentially and adding this stuff to your plate. And yeah, it probably can't, for most people, be realistic to tackle that all in 1 year.
Well, and because of that, and I realized this real quickly, even into the first year of running it, I realized that. And so that's why I offered second year deals for people who wanted to stick around. And even now, as I do my most recent offers, I've broken it out into segments where they can do it all at their own pace. They can do it over time. And so I had to build it in a way that would fit them, because while for me, I kind of like rapidly flew through getting all of that stuff in alignment, but I wasn't doing it on purpose. It was like I said, the book idea had already happened before the podcast. Yeah. But when I finally finished it, it was in this sequential piece. And so, yeah, I get it. It's not, that fast won't work for everybody. So it's fine to do it at your own pace.
No, I love that. So I want to shift gears a little bit. This podcast, right, is called Guts, Grit, and Great Business. So I'm going to ask you a question that you can decline, you can take the fifth, whatever. But what are some of the toughest decisions you've had to make in your business? Or in life, right? We go definitely into the mindset, regular life side on this podcast regularly. So, but for people out there, because I do one of the huge, and one of the huge blocks to us doing anything well in business or taking it to the next level is mindset, right? So, absolutely. So I think it's really beneficial for people to hear about not only the amazing stuff going on, but also times where we've had to struggle through something or make a really hard decision and the outcomes from that. Absolutely. Well, and I love this question because it forces me to kind of really look at what were some of the hard calls that I had to make. And as I look back on that, I think the biggest one for me was really,
I mentioned that prior to doing my podcast, I was chasing the almighty dollar, and I had a high-tech startup company called Graffiti Tech, and we had investment money. We had nearly $1 million in investment funds. And when we hit the end of that financial runway, I could kind of see it coming because we were trying to get more investment. We were struggling to get a second round. And a part of me could very easily have just said, I'm going to fight tooth and nail. I'm going to struggle. I'm going to do everything I can to keep that company going. But I think ultimately I had to realize, I had to dig deep inside of myself and go, why?
Yeah.
Why are you committing? Because I was paying myself a minimal amount. So I was not getting ahead in the world. I'd already sunk all of my life savings into it as well as the investment money that we had. Yeah. So I literally had to go, look, you're chasing money. I had to come to that realization. This is not where your passion is. And you really need to just let it go. And it was scary as hell because, the money ran out. I had to fire myself essentially as the CEO of the company because it couldn't pay me anymore. So that was the end of that. And then it was like, okay, I better find another way to make money fast because I'd already poured all of my own personal savings into it as well. So that was a big call to make.
Yeah, that is. Well, and it's a really powerful example. Thank you for sharing that. And I think, the farther along any of us get in business, I think we have examples like that where we learn our success is so often about what we say no to and what we let go of than what it is about what we continue to say yes to, right? And I've been in this crunch period. COVID, gives us all kinds of opportunities to reevaluate efficiencies in our business and systems and all of the other things, but also bigger picture questions. And I sent this out to my newsletter this week, but I can't remember. I feel bad. I can't remember what I was listening to, probably somebody else's podcast. And there was a conversation about shifting to a CEO mindset, shifting from being the worker bee in your business. And so many entrepreneurs that I serve, they're also the worker bee, right? And even if they have small teams, there's still often too much on their plate. And I know personally that that's the case for me. And so, the phrase that I heard was something along the line of the answer is not doing more, doing less. So long as you continue to try to do more in your business as the work, you're never going to shift to CEO. You're never going to shift to making some of the most powerful decisions. And some of the most powerful decisions are what we say no to. So I love that. I've really been sitting with that recently, but your example is, case in point, making those decisions that are CEO level decisions that are hard to make, but are ultimately what will help us to be more successful rather than stay stuck.
Yeah. I agree 100%.
Yeah. Well, Michael, for people that are listening and who are wanting to connect with you, where are you online? Where do you like to connect with folks?
Probably the two best places would be at michaelneeley.com, which is the home of my firstborn, Consciously Speaking, resides there as a podcast, but it also has a bunch of other basics about me. And then podquest.net is my newest child, and that one is not even a year old yet, but just about a little over by the time this goes live. That show is really where I put a lot of the current work about podcasting there, which is again the tip of the spear. So one of those two places is good.
Awesome. And if you're listening, make sure you check out the show notes because we'll share your social media handles, your websites, whatever you want us to share at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. I think, Michael, you've got a gift to give away.
Yeah.
You want to talk for a minute about that?
Absolutely. So, and it's interesting. I call it it's a report. It's a 17-page guide. It's the simple 5-step process to launch a rockin' podcast in just 14 days. And I use the 14 days piece because, that's how long it was between when I learned what one was and when I launched. Because it is really so easy. I do recommend for someone, if you want to get serious about it, maybe search out a mentor, which I'd be happy to support you. But if you just want to get a show up and running and launch, this is a great guide to help you look at that and see what it takes because it's not rocket science at all.
That's amazing. Well, I'm super excited to share that not only through our show notes, but with my list, because even in the space of time, I've had so many people ask because they saw me. I never talked about a podcast. And then suddenly I had a podcast and they were like, wait, what? I literally went from like not ever thinking about having a podcast to having one launched in about a month. So twice as long. But, people need this. People are trying to figure out how do they do this. And so what a valuable resource. So a couple of things. I'm going to ask you one question and then I'm going to share something. But what final thoughts for people that have stuck it out and are still listening? What final thoughts do you have for our listeners?
Well, if it's about business, if you're thinking of getting into business, and I'll say this about podcasting in general, one of the things that I love about it is that it is pretty much recession proof if you build it right. By the way, I mean, I've got to say you need to build it right, but you can even build your whole business around it. And what I've done is with mine is I've created a freedom lifestyle where I work the hours that I want to. I can take off when I want to, and I can work from anywhere in the world. And even, of course, even pre-pandemic, I was working from home. So there's certain elements of having this freedom lifestyle that a podcast supports, that if that's something that someone's thinking of or considering, I highly recommend getting started down this path because it's working great for me. And I've seen it work tremendously for others as well. And so really it's a possibility of, if you want to do that, go for it.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And the flexibility, being able to work from wherever you are. I mean, it's such a powerful thing to be able to do in our lives. I mean, I go back, even when I talk about legal stuff, right? I ask everybody, like, what's your big why? Why did you go down this path of entrepreneurship? And it's usually related somewhat to that. They want freedom in either who they work for or when they work, right? So, I mean, what a powerful thing to add either to your business or to base a business around. All right. I'll let you go, but not until I share my one final thought, and it gets back to the horse riding. So the movie, I don't see movies that often because I have small children and we've always struggled with keeping childcare. But the last movie that I saw in the theater was Wonder Woman. And they have a phenomenal horse scene in that movie. Do you know the one that I'm talking about? All the women on horses with the bow and arrows.
Yes. Yeah. I'm trying to remember the horse specific piece of it. I was probably just checking out all the women.
Well, definitely easy to do. They're on the beach and there's like, the men have gotten through that protective bubble around that aisle or the island, remember? And they're attacking him on the beach, and the women, they're, all these Amazon women on horses, but I think it's real archery work. And because I read an article somewhere about the training required, again, to develop the skills to even stay on the horse's back while you're trying to shoot a bow and arrow.
Well, absolutely. Well, and it's one of the things that I would teach the horsemen in the jousting field as well, because a lot of the time, I mean, think about it, you're controlling your horse. Now imagine the scenario. You've got the reins in your hand, but you know what? In that same hand is your shield.
That's crazy.
So you're holding a shield there. Well, you need to be able to move that shield around without yanking the horse's head too much. So you're pretty much controlling the horse with your legs. And then you've got your lance or your sword in the other hand. And so you really need to master the control of the horse with just your legs because your arms are in action. So
that's amazing. Well,
training for it.
Yes, it explains why you have to train both the horse and the rider.
Oh yeah.
Not just your average horse.
Well, right. The horse needs to learn to respond to leg commands, really.
Yes. Yeah. That's amazing. Michael, such a pleasure to see you today and to talk with you. I'm so excited to share this. Thank you again for being with us.
Such a pleasure. I love what you're up to in the world, and thank you for having me. It's a total honor.
Absolutely. Well, we will connect again very soon.
Thank you for joining us today on the Guts, Grit, and Great Business Podcast. We hope that we've added a little fuel to your tank, some coffee to your cup, and pep in your step to keep you moving forward in your own great adventures. For key takeaways, links to any resources mentioned in today's show and more, see the show notes, which can be found at legalwebsitewarrior.com/podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, and if you enjoyed today's conversation, please give us some stars and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast so others will find us too. Keep up the great work you are doing in the world, and we'll see you next week.